There's a lot we can learn about the modern Republican Party by looking at one Lindsey Olin Graham, senator from South Carolina. Here's what he said just weeks after the Supreme Court issued its ruling on Dobbs v. Jackson, Women's Health Organization, in June, overturning Roe v. Wade.
The point I'm trying to make is I've been consistent. I think states should decide the issue of marriage and states should decide the issue of abortion.
He's been consistent, he said. A matter for the states. Consistency means nothing to the senator, though, because listen to what he said about abortion laws on Tuesday.
I think we should have a law at the federal level that would say after 15 weeks, no abortion on demand, except in cases of rape, incest, to save the life of the mother. And that should be where America's at. After they introduced the bill to define who they are, I thought it'd be nice to introduce a bill to define who we are.
You heard him. Now it's a federal issue, and the Democrats made him do it because of a gay marriage bill they introduced. But we know what's really going on here, in part because we've covered it before on this show. Senator Lindsey Graham is your classic political flip-flopper, and sometimes he does it so shamelessly I almost envy his confidence. Almost. Here he is defending the GOP's decision in early 2016 to block then-President Obama's nomination of Judge Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court in an election year.
If there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of the first term, you can say Lindsey Graham said, let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make that nomination. And you could use my words against me and you'd be absolutely right.
Funny thing is, well, why don't you just have a listen for yourself? Here he is during the confirmation hearings of now Justice Amy Coney Barrett, just mere weeks before the 2020 election.
There's nothing unconstitutional about this process. This is a vacancy that's occurred through a tragic loss of a great woman, and we're going to fill that vacancy with another great woman. The bottom line here is that the Senate is doing its duty constitutionally.
I mean, the senator literally said we could use his words against him and that we'd be right. You cannot make this stuff up. But this isn't just about Lindsey Graham, although I could go on much longer about him and his flip-flops. This is about the GOP. Graham was supposed to be one of the moderates of the Republican Party, one of the seasoned members of the old guard that represented what it stood for, what the party, the grand old party, stood for before Donald Trump came onto the scene. Graham even led the GOP's outspoken resistance to Trump in 2015 and 2016.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. I'm not going to try to get into the mind of Donald Trump because I don't think there's a whole lot of space there. I don't think he has a clue about anything. He's just trying to get his numbers up and get the biggest reaction he can. I don't think he has the temperament and judgment to be commander-in-chief. He's not a conservative Republican. He's an opportunist. I just really believe that the Republican Party has been conned here. Looking back, we should have basically kicked him out of the party. Okay. We would get slaughtered as a party if Donald Trump's our nominee, and quite frankly, we would deserve it.
We would get slaughtered? And you know the rest. You know the flip-flop. Graham's the guy who went on to become one of Trump's most loyal supporters, cheering him on, joining Trump at campaign rallies. Yes, even after January the 6th, going to play golf with the then former president by then, marching behind him, all smiles, as if he never told us the GOP would get slaughtered if Trump were the Republican nominee. Again, you can't make this stuff up. In fact, you know what Graham said earlier this summer about Donald Trump?
You know what I liked about Trump? Everybody was afraid of him. Including me.
Even the senator is scared of Donald Trump. So is it fear that motivated Lindsey Graham to become a Trump loyalist? Is it self-loathing? Is it opportunism? Because if he's considered a moderate in a party which now appears totally on board with Trump and Trumpism, what does that tell you about moderation in the Republican Party? In fact, it does make you wonder, given everything the GOP stands for today, was it ever moderate? Did a reasonable GOP really ever exist? I've made the argument that not only is there no moderate Republican Party today, it's actually been driving down this dark path for decades, long before Trump came down that golden escalator. But you don't have to take my word for it. Out this week is a new book by #1 New York Times bestselling author and investigative reporter David Corn of Mother Jones called American Psychosis, a historical investigation of how the Republican Party went crazy. And it tells you, well, exactly what the title says. Corn writes about the GOP's devolution. No one person, not even Trump, could have engineered such a profound rupture on his or her own. This was an instance of a man meeting a moment shaped by the actions and inactions of others over a lengthy stretch. It had been years in the making. Joining me now is MSNBC political contributor and author of American Psychosis, David Corn. He's also the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones. David, thanks for coming back on the show. Let me start by asking you about Lindsey Graham. Does it surprise you at all that he's so often been seen and described by our media as a moderate Republican?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the book that you just, I'm grateful that you just promoted, looks at the last 70 years of the Republican Party. And what it chronicles is that there's been a dark side of the Republican Party embracing and encouraging and exploiting far-right conservative extremism, far-right fanaticism, bigotry, paranoia, racism. And this has gone on for all this time. But it's a story that the Republicans have never wanted to acknowledge, and that our media and a lot of our history has never fully told that story, right? So it has allowed the members of the Republican parties, often presidential candidates and others, to say that they're moderate, they're progressive, or they're not with the kooks, and keep a distance from that, even though it's been a central core element of the Republican strategy for so long. So it doesn't surprise me that Lindsey Graham used to be called a moderate, in the way that many members of the Republican Party, whether we're talking about Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney, have been branded as moderates, yes, even though they are part of an entity that has won elections because of its dance and courtship of some of the most far-right or most extreme elements in American society.
And I want to play to you a clip of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi from earlier this year on the Republican Party. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Have a listen.
I want the Republican Party to take back the party, take it back to where you were, where you cared about a woman's right to choose, and you cared about the environment. And this country needs a strong Republican Party, and we do. Not a cult, but a strong Republican Party.
David, when you heard that, you're writing your book, what was your reaction? Because your book argues that what Pelosi is talking about, some ideal Republican Party, it never really existed.
Yeah, one thing I want to do with this book is to bust that myth that we could flip a switch and go back to your father's Republican Party, of country club yes, Republicans who are reasonable, who want to cut deals. Now, that always was an element of the Republican Party. You know, Bob Dole used to cut deals on health care. I mean, Richard Nixon, created social programs while being a race baiter. But so it's always been there. But the Republicans have used that to define the party and put to the side this darker element of its history. And what I'm trying to show in the book is that it's been essential to Republican political success for them to develop this relationship, nurture this relationship with far-right extremism. And we can look at it with I kind of start with Joe McCarthy in the 1950s, but can you look at it with Barry Goldwater and the Birchers in the 60s? You can look at Nixon and the Southern strategy, getting in bed with white Southern segregationists and white supremacists. You can look at Ronald Reagan embracing the new right and the religious right, which literally claimed that gay people wanted to kill their fellow Americans. You bring it up through George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush making a partnership with a Christian coalition that's led by a loony anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist who happened to be named Pat Robertson, Sarah Palin, the Tea Party. It's always been there. John Boehner brought the Tea Party into the Republican Party to win elections. And he was about as much of a country club moderate Republican as you can imagine, but he still did this, and then he lost control. So, I will be respectful of Nancy Pelosi, but she is talking about going back to the good old days that never truly existed. I also think that you can't go back there. This has been a forward motion of the Republican Party, and I argue in the book, or show in the book, that Trump is not an aberration. He is a continuation and perhaps the culmination. It might get worse.
You make a good point. Forward march, you can't imagine a past that never existed. Live in the real world as it is, not as you want it to be. We have upcoming midterms. We've seen election-denying candidates advancing on GOP ballots in primaries across the country, getting ready for November, winning their races, positions that will oversee, defend, certify elections. We've also seen New Hampshire GOP Senate nominee just this week, Don Bolduc, win the Republican primary there, a man who's promoted election conspiracies. Just have a listen to part of his victory speech from Tuesday night.
We have taken their arrows. We have successfully protected ourselves.
I mean, David, what has this party become, and where does it go next?
Well, this is why I call the book American Psychosis. Psychosis is when you're detached from reality and you can't discern objective truth. And if you look at the big lie, these election deniers who are winning elections, as you just outlined, you see a party that's being led now by Donald Trump and others who are promoting of not just an alternative reality, a false reality. And, Bolduc, Trump, they're not the source of the problem. The source of the problem are millions of Americans who are susceptible and who believe this paranoid conspiracy theory of a stolen election, the way that the McCarthyite and McCarthy fans in the 50s believed a small cabal of Democratic officials were purposely trying to destroy the country from inside the government. And that's the psychosis here. And some Republicans like Bolduc may actually believe it. Other Republicans like Lindsey Graham know better, but they're exploiting and exacerbating it. Yeah. And this has been part of this long Republican trend. And we have a party that is leading, millions of Americans who are indeed detached from reality. And that's a big problem for democracy. You talked about the rise of the far right in Europe in the previous segment. This is what creates a base or foundation for those types of movements. If people end up believing things that are not true.